Hi guys, this is Mike L from the Comic Book Syndicate. We are at Snack Barbecue in Windsor, Ontario with our pal, Champ Ian Phillips. Ian, how you doing?
Doing good, Mike.
Awesome. Ian is a fellow Star Wars fan, and let me just say we've probably watched the Red Letter Media reviews of Star Wars. How many times together, Ian?
Together, probably about 3 times in their entirety. All 3 episodes, about 3 times each.
Exactly, and actually tonight we're going to be rewatching Star Wars A New Hope. We're going to talk about Star Wars because, as everyone knows, The Force Awakens is coming out soon, and there's a perception by a tiny minority of the public that thinks that one of the reasons people still love Star Wars so much is because of nostalgia. What is your feeling objectively about the original trilogy, Ian?
Well, my feeling objectively. Now, so you're removing nostalgia from it entirely.
I'm trying to, yes.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing to do. I actually just watched, in preparation for what we're doing here tonight, I watched A New Hope again for the 500,000th time, roughly. Okay. And I did notice that there are certain things about the film that if I were looking at it completely objectively, I would nitpick about. Sure. It's just the whole, it's more about feel with the original Star Wars films. It's more about emotion. It's more about getting to know the characters, about getting to know who the people are and where they were and where they're going, their character arcs and development, and that sort of thing. The story itself is very simple. I think that is one of its strengths. Mm-hmm. It doesn't try to be too complicated. It doesn't try to do too much. It has a very simple premise, a very simple plot, and it handles that plot flawlessly. And that doesn't even begin to touch on being a pioneer in special effects and that sort of thing, and completely changing the movie industry, the sort of things that they were doing at ILM back in the day.
100%, and that's the thing, is that for modern audiences, it is indisputable that Star Wars changed special effects. It changed sound mixing. It changed, all these technical things. I think there's a dispute over how much positive effect it had on filmmaking itself. I think it had, whether it had positive or negative, it definitely had a sweeping effect in that I think movies that came after it are all affected by it. I think we're still living in a post-Star Wars cinematic age, whether people realize it or not. The first film was so fast-paced. It moved around so much. The dialogue was written a certain way that I don't think was really done before then. And I know that Lucas gets criticized for the dialogue, but as we know, he had people rewriting the dialogue for A New Hope, Gloria Katz and William Hauck, who went on to write Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. For me, I think the dialogue in the first Star Wars movie is actually pretty good.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
At least it's quotable. What do you think?
I think that the dialogue it's simplistic as well, and there are those moments where the one quote that sort of springs to mind is Luke Skywalker whining to Uncle Owen that he wanted to go to Tosche Station to get some power converters.
Yes, but I was going into Tosche Station to pick up some power converters.
And you just sort of shake your head a little bit. But at the same time, that sort of dialogue, it is important in a way to the character development, because it shows that Luke was a whiny little brat at the beginning of the film. And without that sort of awkward, oh, you stupid kid kind of dialogue, then things once you go forward to Jedi and the maturity that he has in that film, it is less powerful unless you can see where he came from.
That's a great point. And I remember even as a kid, I actually saw Return of the Jedi in the theater. And I remember when Luke first came out in his black Jedi garb, I remember thinking, oh, well, he's a man now. He's a warrior. He's completely changed from the first film. And so I think you're right. It is simplistic and they do use broad strokes, but there's a lot of great art that's like that, right? Like there's great rock and roll music that's just about partying, having fun, having sex. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as you do it well. I think that's what Star Wars does. It's about very simple themes that's generally aimed at a young audience, but I think that's, like you said, part of the reason why it's lasted so long and it stands up so well.
It stands up to a broad segment of the population. Children can watch it, they can understand it. It's not pedantic, it's not boring, it's not overly simplistic. They revolve around themes that have been part of movie making and storytelling since the dawn of, storytelling. Right?
Now, speaking of being pedantic and boring, there was a prequel trilogy that came out starting in 1999.
I've heard of these vaguely.
Yes.
They ring a bell.
Okay, let me just go back to 1999. We know that there's a prequel coming out. I'm excited, you're excited, everyone's excited. Probably, I'm going to argue, the most anticipated sequel in history, because it's not a sequel to a movie, it's a sequel to a trilogy. It's a sequel to the biggest trilogy ever. Going in, I was so excited, I was so ready, and my disappointment began probably right after that opening title crawl. Although I was suspicious in the title crawl. From the opening line of dialogue, or the second line of dialogue, yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Right before that, that little tiny ship coming out. Versus, in the original trilogy, the giant Star Destroyer. I felt like Lucas did everything wrong from beginning to end. What was your impression of the Phantom Menace?
My impression of the Phantom Menace, it was strange because I didn't know what to think at first. Like you, I was very, very excited. And just to rewind a little bit, prior to the Phantom Menace coming out, we were treated to the remasters of the original trilogy in theaters. Was even with George Lucas remastered edits, it was still amazing. So my appetite had been whet like unbelievably for this new film coming out. And I remember sitting there in the theater and seeing the Star Wars title zoom out and the John Williams music and just like every film that had come before it. And I got goosebumps. And I'm thinking, like, I'm getting little goosebumps right now, just remembering my feelings at the time.
Yes.
But the title crawl was like, this doesn't seem all that interesting. I don't want to learn about a trade dispute.
Yeah.
And then the dialogue, like yourself, a few sentences in, I found myself not being able to understand.
I've got a bad feeling about this.
I have a bad feeling about this.
You mean like that? Or
It was stilted dialogue. They weren't saying anything interesting.
No.
They're speaking in ridiculous accents that made it hard for me to follow along with the actual conversation. Like I couldn't understand the words half the time.
No need to report that to him until we have something to report.
Boring garbage. I couldn't follow along.
No.
And I found myself very quickly not caring. There were some good set pieces there. I mean, the pod race scene was fun to watch. I didn't know why we were doing it, but I'm watching things zoom around. This is for the time, it was pretty decent CGI.
Yeah.
And I walked out of the film kind of thinking, oh, yay, I saw a Star Wars movie that and I tried to convince myself that I enjoyed it. And I couldn't convince myself.
No,
couldn't convince
yourself.
myself. No, I tried.
For me, I can just say, like I said, the problem started early, and then once Jar Jar Binks came on film, I actually did this. I couldn't, like every time he came on film, I just put my hand up. I could not watch him. He was so annoying. And then when the pod race started, I remember thinking, okay, now the movie's going to start. And then they went to Coruscant, and then I thought, okay, now the movie's going to start. And I remember at the point where after Qui-Gon died, and Yoda was like, you will train Anakin, okay, fine. I remember thinking, okay, now the movie's going to start. Now he's going to train him. And then the movie just ended.
Yeah, that was it.
And I remember when the credits rolled, I felt an emptiness. Like, I don't think I've ever been so disappointed at anything in my life. And I remember the next morning waking up, the closest thing I can compare it to is when there's a death in the family, and you wake up the next day and you secretly hope that person's still alive, but then you realize, no, they're actually dead. That's how I felt.
So
What about you?
So you were hoping that actually that movie hadn't existed?
Exactly.
That you just dreamed the entire last couple years of your life?
Yes, that's what I hoped, but I was wrong.
Yes. Well, there's still hope. Maybe you've been dreaming the decades following.
Yeah, let's just hope this has all been a dream. Okay, now, when we come back, though, I'm going to talk about the 10 best things about the prequel trilogy, okay? Yippee! And we're going to see what Ian thinks of my points, okay?
You're wrong on all 10 points.
Before I even say them. All right. Right after this.
The Comic Book Syndicate will be back right after this.